The most hated villain in the myths was also the most necessary. We are about to unravel the full story of Loki, the ultimate trickster of Norse mythology. By the end, you will understand the chaotic and surprisingly tragic journey of the god who both saved and doomed the gods. We will explore his mysterious origins, his monstrous children, and the wild adventures that built and broke his bond with Odin. We will uncover how a clever companion became the architect of the world's end. How do you define a character who is both a creator and a destroyer? Loki's story begins with a paradox, a question mark at his very core. His parentage is a source of deep confusion and ancient debate. He is the son of Fárbauti, a Jotun, a giant of the frost and stone, and Laufey, who is often described as a goddess or a mysterious figure of lesser renown. By blood, Loki is a giant, a being from the race that stands as the eternal enemy of the gods. Yet he is not an outsider looking in. He is welcomed into the golden halls of Asgard, becoming a sworn blood brother to Odin himself. This contradiction is the first clue to his entire nature. He is a being of two worlds belonging fully to neither. Some whispers in the older texts suggest his roots may tap into something even more primal than giants or gods, connecting him to the raw, untamed chaos that existed before the world itself was shaped. This inherent otherness is the shadow he can never escape. Within the structured society of the gods, Loki finds a family of his own. He is married to Sigyn, a goddess known for her profound loyalty and steadfast heart. Together they have two sons, Laufey and Vali. They represent a potential future for Loki, a chance at a normal, peaceful life within the walls of Asgard. Their existence is a quiet, domestic counterpoint to the chaos their father so often courts. But in the world of Norse myth, peace is a fragile illusion, and the fates of these innocent children become heartbreakingly, brutally entwined with Loki's ultimate punishment. Their story is a testament to how the sins of the father are tragically visited upon the sons, a dark thread woven into the tapestry of Loki's legacy long before his final, terrible act. This sacred oath, sworn in blood, is the very key that unlocked the gates of Asgard for Loki. In a ceremony of profound significance, Odin, the All-Father, and Loki, the son of a giant, mingled their blood and pledged a bond of brotherhood stronger than family or race. This was no simple pact of friendship. It was a magical and unbreakable vow, a promise of loyalty that transcended Loki's Jotun heritage and granted him a permanent place among the gods. Without this oath, Loki would have remained an outsider, a potential enemy. Because of it, he became Odin's companion, a resident of the Golden Halls, and a figure the other gods were forced, at least officially, to accept. It is the foundational contract upon which every one of Loki's subsequent actions, both helpful and harmful, is built. Odin, the god of wisdom and war, saw something invaluable in the clever giant. He did not welcome Loki out of pity or a simple desire for chaos. He actively valued Loki's unique mind, his cunning, and his unpredictable nature. Odin understood that the orderly world of the gods sometimes required a mind that did not play by the rules, a trickster who could solve problems that brute force or solemn prayer could not. He prized Loki's sharp wit as a tool, much like his own spear, Gungnir. This created a relationship of profound complexity. On one side, there was genuine affection and the deep, magical obligation of their blood oath. On the other, there was a constant, simmering tension. Loki's very nature, which Odin so valued, was the same force that constantly tested and strained their bond. Loki would perform incredible feats of ingenuity for the gods, only to follow them with acts of such sheer mischief that he would bring the entire realm to the brink of disaster. Can you sense the frustration, the love, and the resentment tangled up in this dynamic? Loki was simultaneously Odin's greatest asset and his most volatile liability, a brother bound by magic and a source of endless trouble. This push and pull, this dance between creator and destroyer, all stems from that one fateful decision to mix their blood and call each other brother. This bond with Odin gave Loki the freedom to become the god he was always meant to be, the master of mischief and cunning. He is the embodiment of chaos, a force of change that the structured world of the gods could never truly contain. Think of him not as a villain in the modern sense, but as a brilliant, unpredictable, and utterly necessary spark of fire. For he is also a god of fire itself, a power that can warm a hall or burn it to the ground depending on how it is wielded. This dual nature is the core of his being. His most famous tool is his shapeshifting. Loki can become anything: a fly, a salmon, a mare, an old woman. He slips between identities as easily as we change our clothes, using this power to infiltrate, to spy, to deceive, and sometimes, surprisingly, to help. But his greatest weapon is his mind, a silver tongue that can weave lies so convincing they feel like truth, and devise plans so clever they border on genius. He is the ultimate problem solver, but his solutions often create entirely new, more complicated problems. His loyalty to the gods is real, but it is constantly at war with his own insatiable need to stir the pot, to test boundaries, and to prove that he is the cleverest one in the room. He saves them from disasters of his own making and from crises they could never have foreseen. He is the friend who gets you out of jail, but only after he was the one who talked you into the crime in the first place. This makes him impossible to pin down. Is he a hero? Is he a menace? The answer is a frustrating, fascinating yes to both. He is the chaotic variable in the divine equation, the one who keeps the gods on their toes and ensures that their golden age is never, ever boring. But that domestic life in Asgard was only one side of the coin. Loki's nature could never be contained by a single home or a single family. Far from the golden halls in the wild lands of Jotunheim, he formed another, far more ominous union with the giantess Angabotha, whose name translates to she who brings sorrow. This was not a partnership of loyalty and peace, but one of raw, primal power. Together, they brought 3 children into the world, and each one was a living nightmare, a direct challenge to the order of the cosmos. Their very existence was a prophecy of ruin. The first was a daughter named Hel. Her appearance was as split as the realm she would one day rule. One half of her body was that of a living, healthy woman, while the other half was that of a corpse, blue and decaying. She was life and death held in a single, unsettling form. The gods, seeing her unsettling nature, cast her out of Asgard and down into the underworld. There she was given authority over a vast domain that would bear her name, Helheim. She became the stern and impartial ruler of all those who did not die in battle, a queen presiding over a vast population of the dead. Her birth signaled that a part of Loki's legacy would forever be tied to the end of life itself. Their second child was Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent. This was no ordinary snake. The gods, in their fear, hurled this monstrous creature into the great ocean that encircles the human world, Midgard, but Jörmungandr did not drown. He grew and he grew and he grew. He expanded until his body formed a perfect, endless loop around all the lands, his tail clutched in his own mouth. He became so immense that he literally bound the world together, a restless, sleeping giant in the depths whose slightest stir could create tidal waves. His presence meant that Loki's influence now literally encircled the entire world, a constant, latent threat sleeping just below the surface. But the most terrifying of the 3 was the wolf Fenrir. From his first moments, he radiated a raw, untamable power that shook the gods to their core. He was not merely a large wolf, he was a force of destruction given fur and fang. The gods saw his potential for boundless growth and limitless fury, and they knew with a chilling certainty that this creature posed a direct threat to their very existence. They saw in his eyes the end of all things. So why did the gods allow these monstrous children to live? Why not simply destroy them at birth? The answer lies in the complex web of fate and prophecy that the Norns, the weavers of destiny, had spun. The gods understood that you cannot simply erase a thread from the tapestry of fate. To kill these children might itself trigger the very doom they sought to avoid. Instead, they chose a path of containment, of binding and banishing, hoping to control the inevitable. In doing so, they set the stage for their own destruction. For these three children of Loki and Angrboda are not just monsters, they are key players in the final act. Hell will provide the army of the dead for the final battle. Jörmungandr will rise from the ocean, poisoning the sea and the sky, and Fenrir, the great wolf, will break his bonds and run free. With the birth of these three, Loki's bloodline was no longer just a source of personal scandal, it had become the very engine of Ragnarök. A single moment of misplaced pride would nearly cost the gods their eternal youth. The story begins not with malice, but with a simple journey, as Loki traveled with Odin and the mighty god Fenrir. While resting to cook an ox, they found their fire mysteriously refused to cook the meat. A massive eagle perched in a tree above them offered a solution. He would allow the fire to burn properly if he could share the feast. They agreed, but the moment the meat was ready, the eagle, who was the storm giant Thysi in disguise, snatched the finest portions for himself. Enraged, Loki grabbed a pole and struck the bird. The weapon stuck fast and the eagle took to the sky, dragging a screaming Loki across the rocky ground. Terrified and battered, Loki begged for release. Thysi agreed to one condition. Loki must lure the goddess Idun out of Asgard along with her precious golden apples of youth. It was a desperate bargain and Loki agreed. He returned to Asgard and went straight to Idun, the keeper of the apples. With his silver tongue, he told her he had found a grove of apples in the forest even more wonderful than her own. He convinced the trusting goddess to follow him, carrying her magical fruit in a special casket. The moment they were beyond Asgard's protective walls, Thysi swooped down, seized Idun in his eagle talons, and carried her off to his barren fortress in Jotunheim. The consequences in Asgard were immediate and horrifying. Without Idun's apples to renew them, the gods began to age. Their skin wrinkled, their hair turned gray, and their strength faded. A pall of decay fell over the golden halls. The gods gathered, their voices weak, and quickly realized Idun was missing and that Loki was the last one seen with her. Their fury was a physical force, and they turned on the trickster, threatening him with a brutal death unless he found a way to bring her back. Cornered and terrified, Loki knew he had to fix the disaster he had created. He went to the goddess Freyja and borrowed her falcon cloak, a magical garment that allowed the wearer to take the shape of the swift bird of prey. He flew on the winds to Thysi's fortress, finding Idun alone while the giant was out at sea. Using his magic, Loki transformed her into a single nut, clasped her tightly in his talons, and shot into the sky, speeding back toward Asgard. When Thysi returned to find his prize gone, his rage shook the mountains. He donned his own eagle form, a bird of immense size and terrifying speed, and gave chase. The gods, watching from the walls of Asgard, saw a tiny falcon streaking toward them, a nut in its grasp, pursued by a colossal eagle darkening the sky. They knew it was Loki, and they rushed to prepare. They piled kindling high on the walls, and the moment Loki shot over the ramparts, they set the wood ablaze. Thysi, blinded by his own fury, could not stop. He flew directly into the towering flames, his feathers caught fire, and he fell, crashing to the ground inside Asgard, where the waiting gods made short work of the stunned giant. Loki had saved the day, but only after engineering the entire catastrophe. He returned Idun to her garden. The gods ate the apples and regained their youth, and order was restored. Yet this pattern of problem and solution, all stemming from his own reckless actions, would define his relationship with the gods forever. Yet another disaster was born from a moment of thoughtless cruelty. Loki, for reasons known only to him, crept into the chambers of the goddess Sif while she slept. Sif was the wife of Thor, renowned for her stunning beauty, which was crowned by a magnificent mane of hair that shone like spun gold. In a single, vicious act, Loki sheared it all off, leaving her scalp bare and desecrated. When Sif awoke and saw her reflection, her heartbreak was profound. And when Thor learned of this violation, his rage was a force of nature. The god of thunder stormed into the hall where Loki lounged, his eyes crackling with lightning. He seized the trickster, his grip like iron, and lifted him from the ground. Thor vowed, in no uncertain terms, to grind every single bone in Loki's body into dust. This was not an idle threat, it was a promise of utter annihilation. Loki, faced with the raw, unbridled power of a genuinely enraged Thor, knew that clever words would not save him this time. He had to fix what he had broken, and the solution had to be nothing short of miraculous. He swore an oath to Thor that he would travel to the realms of the dwarves, the master craftsmen of the cosmos, and procure for Sif a new head of hair, one even more magnificent than the last. This was not a quest born of honor, but a desperate scramble for survival. Loki descended into the dark, fiery forges of Svartalfheim, the world of the dwarves. He sought out the most skilled of all artisans, the sons of Ivaldi. He presented his problem, but he also saw a greater opportunity. To truly appease the gods and restore his own precarious standing, he needed to offer more than just a replacement. He needed to deliver wonders. He commissioned the dwarves to create not one, but 3 legendary artifacts. First, of course, was the new hair for Sif. They forged strands of the finest gold, but imbued them with a living magic, so that when placed upon her head, they would graft to her skin and grow as if they were her own natural hair. Second, they crafted Skidbladnir, a magnificent ship for the god Freyr. This vessel was a masterpiece of engineering and enchantment. It could be folded up like a piece of cloth and tucked into a pocket, yet when unfolded, it was large enough to carry all the gods and their armies. Even more miraculously, it would always find a favorable wind, sailing directly toward its destination no matter which way the winds actually blew. The third gift was for Odin himself, a spear named Gungnir. This was no ordinary weapon. The dwarves forged it with such precision and power that it would never miss its target once thrown. More than that, it was carved with powerful runes that made any oath sworn upon it unbreakable, cementing its role as the sacred symbol of the Allfather's authority and the solemnity of divine law. Loki returned to Asgard not just with a solution to his problem, but with treasures that would elevate the gods themselves. He presented the golden hair to Sif, and her beauty was restored, her radiance even greater than before. He gave Freyr the incredible folding ship and offered Odin the unstoppable spear. The gods were appeased, their anger cooled by the sheer brilliance of the gifts. Loki had once again snatched victory from the jaws of a defeat he himself had engineered. He had turned a catastrophe born of malice into a triumph of cunning and resourcefulness. But this pattern of destructive creation was a dangerous game, and his next visit to the dwarven forges would push his luck to its absolute limit. But Loki's pride would not let him rest on this victory. He could not bear the thought that the sons of Ivaldi alone would receive all the glory for their masterworks, so he sought out another pair of legendary smiths, the brothers Brokkr and Eitri, and he made a boast that would lead to even greater wonders and a far more personal danger. He wagered his own head that these 2 dwarves could never craft treasures to rival the spear, the ship, and the golden hair. He was certain their skills would fall short. Brokkr, taking the bait, agreed to the wager, but the stakes were absolute. If the brothers won, they would claim Loki's head as their prize. The game was on, and the terms were final. Inside their smoke-filled forge, the work began. Brokkr manned the bellows, feeding a relentless fire, while his brother Eitri worked the magic at the anvil. Eitri placed a pig's skin into the forge and gave Brokkr one simple, critical instruction. He must not stop pumping the bellows for a single moment, no matter what happened. As the fire roared and the metal within began to glow, a small fly, which was of course Loki in disguise, buzzed into the workshop. Desperate to sabotage the work and save his own head, the fly landed on Brokka's hand and bit him ferociously. The dwarf flinched but did not break his rhythm, and from the forge Eitri pulled a breathtaking creation, a living boar with bristles of shining gold. This was Gullinbursti, a beast that could run across the sky and see faster than any horse, illuminating the darkness with its brilliant glow. It was a gift fit for the god Freyr. Eitri then placed a bar of gold into the fire, repeating his stern command to Brokka, "Do not stop." The fly returned, this time landing on the dwarf's neck, and it bit down twice as hard, drawing blood. Brokka grunted in pain, his hand trembling, but he held fast to the bellows. From the flames, Eitri drew forth a magnificent ring of solid gold. This was Draupnir, a ring of immense power. Every 9th night, it would drip 8 new rings of equal weight and beauty from itself, an endless, self-replicating treasure. It was a symbol of infinite wealth and royal authority, a perfect artifact for Odin. Then came the final and most important item. Eitri placed a lump of iron into the heart of the forge. He looked Brokka in the eye and told him that any failure now would ruin everything. The fly, sensing this was his last chance, saw his opportunity. It flew directly to Brokka's eyelid and bit down with all its might, the pain so sharp and sudden that Brokka was forced to blink and raise a hand to swat the pest away. For just one crucial second, the rhythm of the bellows was broken. Eitri pulled the finished object from the forge. It was a hammer of immense power and perfect proportions, its head gleaming with deadly potential. It was Mjolnir, a weapon destined for Thor, an instrument of protection for both gods and humanity. Yet, because of that single moment of distraction, the handle was shorter than Eitri had intended. The hammer was still the most powerful weapon ever made, but its compact grip was a permanent mark of Loki's interference. The brothers brought their 3 treasures to Asgard for judgment. The gods gathered and compared the new creations to the old. They saw the glowing boar, the self-multiplying ring, and the mighty hammer. And after much deliberation, they declared the hammer Mjolnir to be the greatest treasure of all, for it was the one object that could defend Asgard from the giants. The dwarves had won the wager. Brokka, victorious, immediately demanded his prize. He wanted Loki's head. Trapped by his own boast and the judgment of the gods, Loki had no clever words to argue his way out. He had to pay the price he himself had set. Yet even in this moment of total defeat, his cunning mind was racing. Brokka advanced with his knife, ready to claim his trophy, and Loki agreed that yes, the head was his. But he added with a sly smile, the wager said nothing about his neck. If Brokka cut into his neck to remove the head, he would be taking what was not included in the bet. The dwarf was left fuming, outwitted by a technicality. As a final, petty act of vengeance, Brokka took an awl and sewed Loki's lips shut, silencing the silver tongue, if only for a little while. Loki had escaped death once more, but he was learning that every triumph, no matter how clever, came with a fresh scar and a deeper well of resentment. So the wager was lost, and Loki was truly cornered. Brokka, with grim satisfaction, raised his knife to claim the prize he was owed. Loki stood before him, the eyes of all the gods watching, and he calmly agreed that yes, his head was indeed the agreed-upon price. But then came the twist, the loophole only Loki could find. He pointed out that while the dwarf could certainly take his head, the wager said nothing about his neck. If Brokka's blade were to cut even a sliver of his neck to remove the head, he would be taking what was not legally his. The sheer audacity of the argument left everyone stunned. Brokka stood there, knife in hand, sputtering with frustration. He could not physically claim the head without violating the very terms he had just won. It was a masterstroke of legalistic trickery, a perfect escape hatch born from a mind that could always find the one unguarded door. Furious and humiliated, Brokka had to settle for a lesser punishment. He fetched an awl and a sturdy leather cord. He grabbed Loki, and with rough, angry hands, he punched holes through the trickster's lips and sewed them tightly shut. For a time, the god of silver-tongued lies was rendered completely silent. He could not speak, he could not smirk, he could only glare with smug, defiant eyes. It was a temporary victory for order, a small moment of payback for the constant chaos. But everyone knew it would not last. The stitches would eventually rot away or be torn free, and Loki's voice would return, perhaps even more cunning and dangerous than before. This entire episode encapsulates his essence. He dances on the edge of disaster, constantly pushing his luck until it shatters, only to use the broken pieces to build a new and even more elaborate escape. He lives in the space between the words of a promise, in the technicality that everyone else overlooks. He is the ultimate survivor, proving that even when he loses, he never truly has to pay the full price. Even the gods could be blinded by a bargain. In their desire for perfect security, the Aesir made a deal that nearly cost them the cosmos. A master builder arrived at their gates, an unnamed giant who offered them an impregnable wall around all of Asgard, a fortress so grand that no army of Jotnar could ever breach it. His price was astronomical: the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freyja herself as his bride. The gods erupted in laughter, deeming the task impossible. They agreed to his terms, but only on one condition: he must complete the entire wall in a single winter, and he could have no help from any man or god. They felt clever, certain of his failure. The builder, however, had one request of his own: to use his stallion, Svadilfari, for the heavy labor. The gods, seeing no harm in a simple horse, foolishly agreed. They did not yet understand that the true power of this giant lay not in his own hands, but in the incredible strength of his equine companion. With the first snowfall, the work began. Svadilfari was no ordinary stallion. He was a force of nature. He hauled colossal blocks of stone through the blizzards, each one larger than a mountain, while the builder fitted them together with impossible speed and precision. As the winter days began to lengthen, a cold dread settled over the gods. The wall was rising, not just quickly, but flawlessly. With only 3 days remaining until the deadline, it was clear the builder would succeed. Panic gripped the golden halls. They would be forced to hand over the very lights of the sky and their most beloved goddess, all for the sake of a wall. Their perfect security would become their ultimate cage. In their fury and fear, they turned as one to the source of all their problems, Loki. He had been the one to advise them, to assure them the giant would fail. They cornered him, their threats echoing with the promise of a violence that would make Thor's past rage seem like a gentle warning. They gave him a simple, brutal ultimatum: find a way to sabotage the builder or they would tear him apart. Loki, facing a death that no clever words could avoid, knew he had to act. He watched as the builder and his magnificent horse prepared for one final, back-breaking day of work. The solution was not in force, but in distraction, a temptation so powerful it could break the focus of even the strongest will. As night fell on the 3rd day, with the final stones nearly in place, a beautiful mare emerged from the shadowy woods near the construction site. She was alluring, her call a siren song that echoed through the quiet evening. Svadilfari, hearing her cry, broke free from his master's control. He tore his harness and bolted into the forest, chasing after the mysterious mare, with the builder screaming in futile rage behind him. The work stopped completely and utterly. The giant had failed. The gods were saved from their terrible bargain, but Loki, the architect of this salvation, had vanished. He had shapeshifted into that very mare, and his desperate plan had worked too well. He had lured away the stallion, but he could not immediately return. He was gone for many months, and when he finally came back to Asgard, he brought with him a consequence that would echo through the ages. For from his union with Svadilfari, he gave birth to a strange, 8-legged foal, a steed of such incredible speed and grace that it would one day be given to Odin himself. This was Sleipnir, the greatest horse ever to exist. Once again, Loki had saved the gods from a cataclysm, but the method created a new, permanent thread in the tapestry of fate, a thread that was both a gift and a reminder of the chaotic price of his interventions. The gods were saved, but their savior had disappeared into the woods. Loki, in the form of that alluring mare, had successfully lured the mighty Svadilfari away, but the plan required a full commitment. He could not simply drop the disguise and run home. He had to play the part until the giant's deadline had passed, a bizarre and humiliating performance for the shape-shifting god. Imagine the scene, a god of Asgard, reduced to galloping through the shadows with a lovesick stallion, all to prevent the theft of the sun and moon. For many long months, Loki was simply gone. The other gods, while relieved about the wall, could only speculate on his strange and undignified fate. When he finally returned, he was not alone. From his time as a mare, a profound and unexpected consequence had emerged. Loki gave birth to a foal, a strange and gangly creature with a most peculiar feature, 8 powerful legs. This was Sleipnir, a being born from pure trickery and necessity. The foal grew into the most magnificent steed the 9 worlds would ever know, a horse whose 8 legs moved with such fluid speed that he could gallop across the sky, over the sea, and even into the land of the dead. Odin, the All-Father, saw the immense value in this unique creature and claimed Sleipnir as his own. The great horse became Odin's constant companion, carrying him swiftly between the realms on his quests for wisdom. It is a deeply ironic legacy, the ultimate symbol of royal power and divine travel, born from one of Loki's most desperate and personally compromising acts. He saved the gods from a terrible fate, but the method cemented his role as the ultimate wild card, a god who would willingly embrace any form, any humiliation, to weave his chaotic solutions into the fabric of their world. The golden hall of the sea god Aegir shimmered with a rare and fragile peace. Torches cast a warm, wavering light on the gathered gods and elves, their laughter mingling with the gentle rhythm of the sea outside. Mead flowed freely from Aegir's magical cauldron, which brewed endless drink for all. It was a scene of perfect harmony, a celebration of fellowship where every being was welcome and every insult was set aside. Yet this harmony was a delicate shell, and the one being capable of shattering it was already approaching the doors. Loki, the architect of so many crises, found himself standing outside this circle of light. When he tried to enter, the gods, their patience worn thin by his recent deceptions, initially barred his way. The rejection was a public slap, a final confirmation of his growing isolation. But Loki would not be denied. He forced his way into the hall, and the festive atmosphere chilled in an instant. He did not come to drink or to jest. He came with a weapon far more destructive than any blade, his silver tongue, now sharpened into a scalpel of pure slander. He began to speak, and his words were not the clever riddles of a trickster, but a torrent of calculated, hateful truths and venomous lies. He moved from god to goddess, systematically tearing down their dignity. He mocked Odin for the perceived unfairness of his magic. He jeered at Freyja for her many loves, and he laid bare every secret shame and failed endeavor. He reminded Thor of his moments of weakness, his struggles against giants where he had not emerged the flawless hero. Each accusation was a precisely aimed dart, designed not to playfully tease, but to humiliate and wound. The other gods tried to laugh it off at first, to dismiss him as a drunkard, but his words were too sharp, too specific. The joyful feast curdled into an arena of public shaming. This was not the chaotic mischief of a god testing boundaries. It was the raw, unfiltered outpouring of a soul steeped in bitterness. In that hall, surrounded by the family that had never fully accepted him, Loki crossed a line from which there could be no return. He was no longer the clever problem solver, the necessary evil. He had become an exposed nerve of pure malice, and the sound of his rage would echo straight into the chains that awaited him. Loki's words fell like poisoned darts, each one aimed with cruel precision at the heart of the god's pride. He turned first to Odin, the All-Father, and instead of honoring their ancient blood oath, he spat upon it. He accused Odin of practicing a perverted form of magic, of wielding his spear not with honor, but with deceit, granting victory unfairly in battle. The accusation hung in the air, a direct challenge to the very foundation of Odin's authority. Then his gaze swept to Frigg, Odin's wife, and he charged her with infidelity, a venomous claim that struck at the sanctity of the royal marriage. The hall, once filled with laughter, was now a courtroom of silent horror. He moved on, a storm of contempt. He mocked the mighty Thor, reminding everyone of the time the thunder god had been tricked in the hall of the giant Utgar, the Loki. He recounted how Thor, for all his strength, had been humiliated, unable to lift a cat that was the world's serpent in disguise, and failing to empty a drinking horn connected to the ocean itself. He twisted the tale from one of the giants' cunning into a story of Thor's cowardice and weakness. But his most vicious barbs were saved for Freyja. He laid bare her many loves, calling her promiscuous and accusing her of sleeping with every god and elf in the hall. Each secret he exposed was a thread pulled from the tapestry of their society. The gods tried to laugh, to brush it off as the ramblings of a drunkard, but his words were too sharp, too specific, and spoken with a malice that was impossible to ignore. This was not a game. It was a calculated demolition of every reputation in the room. The warmth of the feast was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. In that moment, Loki was no longer a mischievous brother. He was a mirror, forcing them to see every hidden flaw and buried shame, and he shattered the peace of Aegir's hall forever. The Golden Hall fell silent, but the echo of Loki's words had already sealed his path. Nothing he had done before, no lie or cruel prank, could compare to the act that would follow. The target of his final, most devastating trick was the one god no one could bring themselves to hate, Balder the Beautiful. Balder was the son of Odin and Frigg, a god so pure and radiant that light itself seemed to emanate from him. He was the embodiment of all that was good and joyful in the world, a being whose very presence brought peace and laughter to the halls of Asgard. His kindness was absolute, his nature untarnished by the petty squabbles that consumed the other gods. But even this perfect light was shadowed by prophecy. Balder began to be haunted by terrible dreams, visions of his own impending death. These were not mere nightmares, they were whispers from the Norns themselves, a fate that could not be simply ignored. His mother, Frigg, was consumed by a desperate, all-consuming fear. She would not let this happen. She embarked on a monumental quest, traveling to every corner of the 9 worlds. From the fire and the water, to the iron and the stone, to every animal, plant, and disease, she secured a sacred oath. Each and every entity in all of creation swore a binding vow that it would not harm her son. It was a spell of perfect protection, a mother's love made manifest in magic. When her work was done, the gods rejoiced. To celebrate Balder's newfound invulnerability, they invented a game. They would gather in a field and take turns hurling weapons and stones at him. A spear would be thrown, only to turn harmless inches from his chest. An axe would be swung, only to bounce away with a merry clang. It became a joyful spectacle, a testament to their collective victory over fate. Everyone laughed, everyone celebrated, everyone except Loki. He watched this display of perfect safety, this circle of love and joy from which he was fundamentally excluded, and a cold, calculating hatred took root. He could not bear their happiness. Disguising himself as an old woman, he went to Frigg's hall and spoke with the goddess. With feigned curiosity, he asked her about the game and the oath she had secured. Proud and trusting, Frigg confirmed that she had indeed received oaths from every single thing in existence. Well, the old woman prodded every single thing. Frigg, with a dismissive wave of her hand, admitted there was one exception. There was a small, unassuming plant called the mistletoe growing west of Valhalla. It seemed so young, so innocent and weak that she saw no reason to demand an oath from it. What harm could it possibly do? It was the one thread she had left unbound. For Loki, it was the key. He immediately went west, found the mistletoe bush, and carved from it a sharp, deadly dart. He then returned to the field where the gods were still playing their game. He noticed the blind god Hertha, Baldur's own brother, standing aside from the fun, unable to participate because he could not see to aim. Loki approached him with a voice full of false kindness. He placed the mistletoe dart in Hertha's hand, guiding his aim. He told the blind god he would help him honor his brother, that he would direct his throw so he could join the celebration. Trusting completely, Hertha took the dart, and with Loki guiding his arm, he threw it. The small green shaft flew through the air, and instead of turning aside, it struck Baldur straight through the heart. The shining god fell, his light extinguished instantly. The laughter in the field died, replaced by a silence more profound than any the 9 worlds had ever known. In that one calculated act, Loki did not just kill a god. He murdered hope itself, and he ensured that his own fate was now irrevocably written in stone. A profound silence descended upon the field, a grief so heavy it seemed to choke the very air. The gods stood frozen around the body of the shining Baldur, their celebration twisted into a scene of unimaginable horror. No one could speak, no one could move, for the unthinkable had happened. The one death that was never meant to occur had shattered their world. Their first instinct was for vengeance, but they were bound by their own sacred laws, unable to spill blood within the sanctified peace of their own realm. So instead of killing the murderer, they turned their rage on the one who had enabled him, the blind and unwitting Hertha, and struck him down where he stood. But even this act of fury brought no comfort, only a deeper stain upon their souls. Frigg's heart, though shattered, clung to one last, desperate thread of hope. She had heard a whisper, a possibility. She stood before the gods, her voice trembling but clear, and asked for a volunteer. Who among them was brave enough to ride to the land of the dead and plead for her son's return? Only one being possessed the speed and courage for such a hopeless quest. Hermod the Bold, another son of Odin, stepped forward. He mounted Odin's own 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, the very horse born from Loki's earlier trickery, and galloped down the long, dark road to Helheim. For 9 nights he rode through deepening shadows until he reached the bridge over the River of Knives, guarded by a monstrous maiden. He did not stop. He urged Sleipnir onward, leaping over her to reach the cold, mist-shrouded halls of Hel herself. He found his brother Baldur there, seated in a place of honor, yet a prisoner all the same. Hermod fell to his knees before the half-corpse goddess and begged. He spoke of the gods' boundless grief, of a world cast into shadow, and he pleaded for Baldur's release. Hel, the daughter of Loki, listened to his entreaties with an impassive face. She was a ruler, not a monster, and she understood the laws of life and death. But she was not without mercy. She would allow Baldur to return to the land of the living, she declared, but only on one condition, a condition that seemed at first beautifully simple. If it was true that Baldur was loved by all things, as Frigg had claimed, then it must be proven. Every single thing in all of creation, every being, every object, every force of nature must weep for him. If one single thing in all the 9 worlds refused to shed a tear, then Baldur would remain with her forever. A wave of impossible hope washed over the gods when Hermod returned with this news. They immediately sent messengers to every corner of existence, and a miracle began to unfold. The trees wept sap, the stones wept dew, and the metals within the earth wept rust. The fire wept smoke, and the wind wept its mournful howl. Every animal, every giant, every dwarf, every god, every blade of grass shed tears for the lost light of Baldur. The entire cosmos united in a single, sorrowful lament. It seemed the condition would be met, but in a dark, secluded cave, the messengers found one last being, a bitter old giantess named Thirk. They pleaded with her, they told her of the tragedy, they begged her to weep so that Baldur could come home. The old woman merely scowled. "Let Hel keep what she holds," she croaked. Thirk never got any good from the Old One, dead or alive. she would not weep a single tear, and with that stubborn, hateful refusal, the last hope of the gods withered and died. For Thirk was, of course, Loki in one of his most vile disguises. He had already orchestrated the murder, and now he personally ensured there would be no resurrection. This was not a clever trick or a chaotic prank. It was a deliberate, calculated act of pure spite, a final declaration of war against the family that had both embraced and scorned him. He extinguished their hope not with a weapon but with a dry eye, proving that his transformation was complete. The god of fire had become a god of absolute chilling cold. Loki's final act of spite shattered the last vestiges of their patience. The murder of Balder was a crime beyond any forgiveness, and the gods' grief curdled into a cold, unified fury. They would hunt him down. Loki knew his time in the Golden Halls was over. He fled Asgard, his mind racing with schemes of evasion. He built a small house near a roaring waterfall, Franangursfors, a place with 4 doors so he could watch every direction for approaching danger. He knew the gods would use their magic to find him, so he spent his days weaving new plans, his thoughts as tangled as the threads of a net. It was there, contemplating escape, that he considered the perfect form, a creature that could slip away through the water, swift and unseen. He imagined the salmon, its sleek body cutting through the current, and he began to craft the design of a net in his mind, turning the idea over and over. But in his arrogance, he never considered that the gods might think exactly as he did. Odin, from his high seat, saw everything. He knew where Loki was hiding, and he knew what form he contemplated. The gods, led by Thor, descended upon the waterfall like a storm. Loki saw them coming, and in a panic, he threw the half-formed net into the fire and transformed, leaping into the water as a salmon, disappearing into the churning foam. The gods searched the empty house and found the ashes of the net, its distinctive pattern burned into the embers. It was all they needed. They understood his plan because it was his own creation. They wove a new net, the first net ever made, based on the pattern Loki himself had imagined. They cast it into the waterfall. The first pull caught nothing. The second time, they weighted the net so it dragged along the riverbed. But Loki, the salmon, was too clever. He leaped over the top of the net and escaped. The third time they were ready. Thor waded into the center of the current, gripping the net, and as Loki tried his leaping escape once more, the thunder god caught him mid-air, his hand closing around the slippery fish with an unbreakable grip. The chase was over. His capture sealed a punishment of legendary cruelty. They dragged him to a secluded cave, a barren chamber of stone. Here, the full weight of his actions would fall not just on him, but on the only innocent part of his life. The gods seized his 2 sons from Sigyn, Laufey and Vali. In a brutal act of magic, they transformed Vali into a wild wolf, his form twisting, his mind consumed by a bestial rage. The wolf Vali immediately turned on his own brother, Laufey, tearing him apart. The gods then took the entrails of the murdered son, still warm and sinewy, and used them as bonds. They dragged Loki to 3 sharp, slanted rocks, and they bound him. One rope of intestines stretched across his shoulders, another across his loins, and a third behind his knees, each one digging into his flesh, lashing him immovably to the stone. The entrails, touched by the magic of his son's violent death, hardened into iron, a chain forged from his own family's tragedy. He was trapped not by the might of Thor, but by the consequence of his own hatred, a prisoner in a tomb of his own making. Bound to the cold stone with bonds of iron made from his own son's flesh, Loki's torment was only beginning. The gods were not finished with their sentence. Directly above his helpless head, they fastened a monstrous serpent to the stalactites of the cave. From its fangs dripped a continuous stream of burning venom, a slow, relentless poison aimed directly at his face. This was not a punishment meant to kill him, but to torture him, to make him feel an agony without end for the death of Balder. Yet in this chamber of horrors, one figure defied the will of all the other gods. His wife, Sigyn, remained. While every other being in the 9 worlds had turned against him, her loyalty never wavered. She knelt beside her bound husband, a simple wooden bowl in her hands. She positioned herself to catch every single searing drop of venom before it could touch his skin. Her vigil was eternal. She did not eat, she did not sleep, she did not look away. She became the sole barrier between Loki and endless, unimaginable pain. Her love was a silent, steadfast rebellion in the face of divine vengeance, but even her devotion had its limits. The bowl was not bottomless. It would slowly, inevitably fill with the serpent's vile poison. When it could hold no more, Sigyn had no choice. She had to turn away from her husband to empty the bowl. In those few moments, the burning venom would fall unimpeded onto Loki's face. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The god of fire, struck by a liquid flame of pure agony, would convulse with such violent force that the entire earth shook. The people of Midgard, feeling the ground tremble beneath their feet, would call these events earthquakes, never knowing they were witnessing the spasms of a bound god. As the poison hit him, Loki would thrash against his unbreakable bonds, his screams echoing through the hollow cave, until Sigyn returned to her post, once again holding the bowl aloft, resetting the cycle of temporary relief and inevitable suffering. This is his existence until the end of days. He is trapped in a loop of pain, saved only by a love he may no longer deserve, his anguish so profound that it physically reshapes the world. It is a fate crafted from perfect cruelty, a constant reminder of his crime and the one good thing his chaos could not destroy. But even a prison of iron and venom cannot hold a god of chaos forever. The prophecies whisper of a time when all bonds will break and the world will shudder in its final hour. This is Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, and Loki has a starring role in the apocalypse. The great winter, Fimbulwinter, will descend, 3 years of unending cold that starves the world of hope and warmth. In the chaos and darkness, the very foundations of the cosmos will loosen. The ground will heave, and the hardened entrails that bind Loki to the rock will finally snap. He will be free, his body racked with centuries of pent-up agony, his heart filled with a hatred that has only festered in the dark. His freedom is the starting gun for the end of everything. He does not emerge to seek forgiveness or to hide. He strides forth as a general of ruin. His first command is to muster a fleet, but this is no ordinary ship. From the darkest shores of Helheim, he will call upon Naglfar, the largest vessel ever built. Its construction is a horror in itself, pieced together over ages from the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the dead. Every neglected corpse, every soul that failed to honor the simple act of trimming their nails in life, has contributed a piece to this monstrous warship. It is a craft built from disrespect, a physical manifestation of all the forgotten duties and petty failures of humanity. Loki himself will take the helm as its captain, his hands gripping the wheel made of bone as he sails from the frozen north. He will not be alone. The ship will be crammed with a ghastly army, the hordes of Hel herself, the dishonored dead who did not die in battle, alongside the frost giants and fire giants united in their hatred of the gods. They will surge towards the final battlefield, Vigridr, a plain 100 leagues wide where the last great war will be fought. Loki, the once welcome trickster of Asgard, now leads the charge against his former blood brothers, truly earning his title as the Captain of Chaos. The battlefield of Vigridr is a storm of steel and fury, but amidst the world-ending clash, one duel is intensely personal. Loki's gaze locks onto Heimdallr, the brilliant guardian of the Bifrost Bridge. For ages, these two have been opposites in a divine balance. Heimdallr is the ultimate sentinel, blessed with senses so sharp he can hear the grass grow and see for 100 leagues. He represents structure, vigilance, and the sacred order of Asgard. Loki is his antithesis, the master of deception, the unraveler of plans, the very embodiment of the chaos that seeks to topple that order. Their final confrontation was always written in the stars, a duel that could only ever end in mutual destruction. As Loki charges across the blood-soaked plain, Heimdallr meets him without hesitation. There is no grand speech, only the grim acceptance of a fate they both saw coming. Their fight is not one of massive, world-shattering blows like Thor's battle with the serpent, but a vicious, intimate contest of skill and hatred. Heimdallr fights with the precise, unwavering discipline of a watchman protecting his post. Loki fights with the desperate, cunning ferocity of a prisoner who has just been set free, every movement fueled by centuries of agonizing torment. They are a perfect match, two forces of equal power cancelling each other out. The guardian of order and the harbinger of chaos clash in a whirlwind of strikes and parries, each one knowing that to falter for a single second is to die. In the end, they find their fatal opening at the exact same moment. Heimdallr's sword finds Loki's heart just as Loki's blade sinks into the watchman's chest. They fall together, two pillars of the old world collapsing into the dust. Their mutual annihilation is deeply symbolic. It proves that order cannot survive without the chaos that defines it, and that chaos cannot triumph without the order it seeks to overthrow. In their death, they complete each other, ending the long game that began the day Loki first stepped into Asgard. And so the dust settles on the final battlefield, leaving us with the ultimate paradox. How do we define a god who was both the architect of the gods' greatest strengths and the engineer of their utter ruin? Loki's legacy is a tangled web of contradictions, a story that refuses the simple labels of hero or villain. He was the necessary spark in a world that risked becoming too rigid, too sure of itself. Think of the gods' most prized possessions, the very symbols of their power. Odin's spear, Gungnir, which never misses and upon which all sacred oaths are sworn, was a gift from Loki's cunning. Thor's mighty hammer, Mjolnir, the primary defense of both Asgard and humanity, exists because Loki goaded the dwarves into creating it. Even Odin's legendary eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, was a direct, if bizarre, result of one of Loki's most desperate and humiliating interventions to save the gods from a terrible bargain. Without Loki's chaos, the gods would have been significantly weaker, poorly equipped, and perhaps even overthrown long before Ragnarök. He was the ultimate problem solver, but his solutions always came with a price, often creating the next crisis he would have to navigate. He forced change upon a pantheon that might have otherwise stagnated in its golden halls, never challenged to innovate or adapt. He held up a mirror to their hypocrisy, exposed their secrets, and reminded them that their perfect order was an illusion. Yet this same catalytic nature, this relentless force of change, could not be controlled. The same mind that devised brilliant solutions festered with resentment when it felt scorned and unappreciated. The murder of Balder was not a chaotic whim. It was the calculated act of a being who had been pushed to the outer edges of the family he was bound to, a final, terrible proof of his power to disrupt. He is the fire he embodies, capable of warming the hearth or burning the entire house down. His story asks us a difficult question: can we truly have creation without destruction? Can order exist without the chaos that gives it shape and meaning? Loki is the answer, a tragic, frustrating, and fascinating answer. He is the reminder that in any system, in any story, the agent of change is rarely pure, and the price of progress is often paid in chaos. The myths we have followed are not a single, unified book, but a collection of voices from a fading world. Our primary windows into Loki's story are two ancient Icelandic texts, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. The Poetic Edda is the older of the two, a compilation of poems whose origins stretch back into the Viking Age, passed down orally before being written on parchment. These poems are like fragmented songs, often cryptic and elusive, presenting Loki in all his complex glory, from his clever flighting contests to his role in the death of Balder. Then, centuries later, an Icelandic scholar and chieftain named Snorri Sturluson wrote the Prose Edda. This was a textbook, a guide for aspiring poets who needed to understand the old myths and the complex kennings, the metaphorical phrases used within them. Snorri collected, systematized, and explained the old stories, often drawing from the very poems found in the Poetic Edda. His work gives us a more narrative and structured account of the gods and their fates. The crucial point is this: the most damning chapters of Loki's story, his vicious insults at Aegir's feast and the calculated murder of Balder, are present in both sources. This dual attestation solidifies his transformation from a troublesome trickster into the pivotal antagonist of the Norse cosmos. He was not a minor figure or a later invention, but a fundamental and terrifying force whose chaotic arc was essential to the entire mythological cycle. A character whose destructive path was recorded in both song and saga, ensuring his legacy would echo long after the gods themselves had fallen. The ancient Norse world fell silent, its stories preserved in parchment and poetry, but the gods were not yet done with humanity. A new pantheon would rise, not in the halls of Asgard, but on the printed page and the silver screen. The 20th century saw Loki reborn, his shape-shifting nature adapting perfectly to the modern age of comic books and blockbuster films. In the Marvel universe, the complex, often terrifying figure of the myths was refined into a new archetype, the charming and conflicted anti-hero. This modern Loki retained his silver tongue and his talent for illusion, but his motivations were dramatically reframed. No longer a primordial force of chaotic change, he became Thor's embittered adoptive brother, wrestling with a deep-seated jealousy and a desperate, tragic need for approval from his father, Odin. This familial drama provided a psychological core that the ancient sources never explored, transforming acts of world-ending malice into the tantrums of a brilliant, neglected child. The raw, sinister ambiguity of the god who orchestrated Balder's death was sanded down into a relatable, almost sympathetic rivalry. We see him not as a herald of apocalypse, but as the prodigal son, his pain making him compelling rather than purely monstrous. Yet the core of the trickster remains brilliantly intact. His cleverness, his theatricality, his ability to weave lies that feel like truths. These are the direct inheritance from the old poems. The Marvel version simply redirects these traits. Where the mythic Loki might unleash a serpent to poison the sky for his own inscrutable reasons, the modern Loki seeks a throne not merely to rule but to prove his worth. His chaos is a cry for attention, his betrayal a symptom of a broken heart. This reinterpretation asks a different question of the audience. Can we forgive him? Can we see the god of mischief not as an agent of doom, but as a lost soul capable of redemption? This softening of his edges makes his character more palatable for a contemporary audience that craves complex villains with humanizing flaws. He is no longer the bound prisoner in a cave, but the charismatic, unpredictable fan favorite whose next move is always a delightful mystery. The journey from the sinister instigator of Ragnarök to the charismatic, morally grey prince of Asgard demonstrates the incredible flexibility of myth. It proves that the oldest stories are never truly finished, but are constantly being reshaped, retold, and reborn to speak to the fears and desires of a new world. This constant dance between belonging and betrayal reveals a mind at war with itself. Loki's story is not merely one of mischief, but a profound psychological drama. He is the eternal outsider, a Jotun living in the polished halls of the Aesir, forever reminded of his otherness. He walks among gods who see him as a useful tool, a clever pet, or a dangerous liability, but rarely as a true equal. This fundamental alienation creates a deep-seated identity crisis. Who is he really? Is he Odin's sworn brother, or is he the blood of their ancient enemies? Is he a god of Asgard, or a giant in a golden cage? His entire existence becomes a performance, a series of masks worn so long he may have forgotten his own face beneath them. His intelligence, his greatest asset, becomes his curse. He is perpetually the smartest person in the room, yet he is never granted the respect or the belonging that should accompany such brilliance. His wit is a shield against his own insecurity, and every clever plan is both a proof of his worth and a scream for acknowledgement. Can you feel the frustration of being eternally undervalued, of having your genius used while your soul is ignored? This is the core of his tragedy. His most destructive acts are not born from pure evil, but from a desperate, flawed, and ultimately self-destructive search for significance. When he orchestrates the death of Balder, it is the ultimate act of a being who has been pushed to the edge. He destroys the thing the gods love most because he can, proving his power is real and cannot be dismissed. He would rather be hated and feared than be overlooked and tolerated. It is a catastrophic bid for a place in their story, even if that place is as the villain. His intelligence, which so often saved the gods, twists in on itself, ensuring that the very world he sometimes sought to protect becomes the stage for his final, ruinous performance. He is a figure whose search for identity and meaning leads him to burn down the only home he has ever known, a poignant reminder that the most dangerous chaos often blooms from a wounded heart. Loki's symbolism runs as deep and hot as the fire he embodies. Fire is a primal force, a tool of immense potential that can warm a family hearth, cook a life-saving meal, or forge a god's unbreakable spear. In the right hands, it is the spark of civilization, but let that same fire slip its confines, and it becomes a raging wildfire that consumes entire forests without remorse. Loki is both of these things. He is the clever solution that warms the halls of Asgard, and he is the uncontrolled blaze that burns them down. This duality is not an accident, it is the core of his purpose. He is the element of change itself, unpredictable and impossible to fully tame. Without his fiery ingenuity, the gods would never have possessed their greatest treasures, yet that same destructive heat ultimately forged the weapons of their doom. He is the spark in the tinderbox of the cosmos, and his story asks whether you can truly have the warmth of the hearth without ever risking the forest fire. This connects directly to his role as chaos incarnate. We often think of chaos as mere destruction, a mindless force of ruin. But in the Norse worldview, chaos was also a creative power. It was the raw, unstructured material from which order was first carved. Loki is that untamed potential. He constantly shatters the rigid structures of the gods, not always for a malevolent purpose, but because stagnation is a kind of death. He breaks their complacency, forces them to adapt, and reminds them that their perfect golden age is a fragile construct. The ultimate expression of this is Ragnarök itself. The twilight of the gods is not merely an end, it is a necessary cleansing. The old world, with all its entrenched conflicts and corrupted oaths, must be burned away so a new, greener world can rise from the ashes. Loki is the agent of that cosmic reset. He is the painful but essential fever that breaks to allow for healing, the storm that clears the air. In this light, Loki becomes the necessary flaw in the divine system. Imagine a world of perfect, unchanging gods, a realm where every day is the same celebration. Every problem has a predetermined solution, and no one ever challenges the status quo. It sounds peaceful, but it is also a dead world, a beautiful painting that never changes. Loki is the crack in that painting, the variable that introduces unpredictability and forces growth. His tricks and deceptions are the friction that hones the gods' wisdom and strength. Without him testing their limits, exposing their hypocrisies, and pushing them into impossible situations, they would grow soft and weak. He is, ironically, the reason they are so resilient. He is the grit in the oyster that eventually produces a pearl, a constant, aggravating presence that, through conflict, forges a stronger reality. His chaos is the price of a dynamic universe, a reminder that even the most perfect system requires a little mischief to keep it truly alive. His journey is a descent from the golden halls into a cave of his own making. Loki began as Odin's clever brother, a silver-tongued savior who gifted the gods their greatest treasures. He ended as the groaning prisoner whose agonized spasms shake the very earth, waiting to break free and lead the charge against everything he once helped build. This is the arc of the ultimate paradox, a being impossible to pin down with a simple label. He was the architect of Asgard's strength and the engineer of its absolute ruin. Can a character be both the essential spark of ingenuity and the final, consuming fire? Loki's entire existence is the answer to that question. He embodies the duality of creation and destruction, proving that one cannot exist without the other. His story forces us to confront a profound truth about the nature of our own world. Loki reminds us that chaos is not the opposite of order, but its necessary counterpart. He is the friction that prevents stagnation, the unpredictable variable that makes the story worth telling. So, what do you think? Was he a tragic hero shaped by rejection, or a villain who fulfilled his destiny? Share your favorite Loki story or your take on his true nature in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the ultimate trickster, subscribe for more journeys into the heart of mythology.